Hello out there, Michael Tingser here. Coming Back Stronger is a special edition podcast series focusing on the way food and drinks businesses are bouncing back as the world slowly starts to reopen from COVID-19. We will especially be sharing great stories on how progressive leaders are bouncing back from the pandemic by utilizing the power of technology and delivery. By listening into these conversations in the coming period, you will be able to pick up some great stories, insights, and facts, as well as best practices from industry experts, independent operators to national chains, who all are setting a new standards for how to operate in the new normal. Vita Mojo and Hospitality Mavericks join forces on this project due to have a shared belief on how tech play a massive role in building companies that's good for people, communities, and the planet. In this episode, our guest is Rob Kidd, a management consultant and expert in hospitality technology. Rob and Michael talk about how tech is changing the hospitality industry and how progressive operators are using tech to survive and thrive during and in the aftermath of the pandemic. Rob also gives a number of great advice on how to optimize your digital strategy to ensure short and long-term return of investment. Take time out, grab notebook and your pen, and enjoy. Welcome to the Coming Back Stronger special edition podcast series. And we are now in the early June, and we are probably 11, 12 weeks into lockdown, not lockdown. I'm not 100% sure where we are with all the things going on right now. And a lot of things have happened. And there's a subject we're going to talk about today that's very relevant compared to what's happening right now in hospitality, and that's digitalization. And this period have shown the importance of being digital or going digital or expanding your digital reach. And to discuss that, I've invited a good friend and a colleague of mine, Rob Kidd, who he has a quite extensive knowledge about technology and hospitality. So welcome to the podcast, Rob.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
And Rob, for people that haven't seen the great content you have shared out there on hospitality tech recently and seen your very beautiful index we'll come back and talk about later. Who are Rob, and what is your role around digitalization and hospitality?
I am a freelance management consultant. I help organizations to implement change and organizational improvement, and increasingly that has a technology focus to it. So I'm often asked to advise on what aspects of an organization's technology they ought to focus on, how to evaluate providers, and how to implement the solution that they choose. I started my career in hospitality in running food-led pubs and restaurants for several years. And then I took a segue through local government and non-profits, but now I'm back in hospitality, focusing on those improvement projects and helping operators to find and implement new tech solutions.
To give a couple of examples of some of the projects you have worked on the last couple of years or year, what have that been, and what have specifically been the challenges?
Sure. So for the last 2 or 3 years, I've been alternating between Pret a Manger and Gale's Artisan Bakery between other assignments. So for Pret, I project managed the implementation of a mobile app for their US business. And then more recently, I supported the migration of their global e-commerce websites onto a single platform and to a single agency. And then for Gale's, I've worked on rolling out a new POS system, reviewing their strategic procurement and consolidating their supplier base. And then more recently, looking at product lifecycle management software and looking at a review of their people management applications.
And that's super interesting because we had this conversation off this podcast a lot of time, the maturity or the adaptation of technology in the industry. And we have often talked about that this industry has been quite late into be disrupted by technology in the way other sectors has, or the adaptation of it for sure. Where do you see hospitality? If we just cut away, we are now in the pandemic, and a lot of things has been fast forward. We can come back to that. But where if you should give like the big picture of where you see hospitality are from a majority point of view, from adapting technology, using that both for our guests and for the employees.
I think it varies, and hospitality is a very broad church. No one really goes into the hospitality industry, I don't think, with a view to it being a particularly technology-focused career. So often, people found a restaurant or a bar or a coffee shop because that's their passion, and the idea of sort of there being really very much technology that's relevant to that, I think, is still pretty rare. Recently, and I don't mean sort of during COVID-19, but in the last, I guess, 3 to 5 years, the tech community, if you like, seems to have caught up a bit. And now there's a huge offer for hospitality operators to potentially pick different solutions that might help them become more efficient, grow their margins, really drive sales. So there's a lot out there, but I think it's something that as an industry we've perhaps if not feared, then certainly kind of struggled to get the most out of compared to, for example, retail. It's also interesting, I think I would draw a sort of a divide between some of those hospitality companies, particularly the sort of larger multiples that have been around for a few years. They seem to find it harder to adopt new technology solutions, to kind of pivot, to really sort of try new ways of having an operating model. For example, that shift from in-store to online and for delivery and click and collect. And when new organizations have popped up, they found it easier to adopt new systems. So, for example, in the States, Sweetgreen, the kind of high-end salad chain, if you like, for a long time, they were very long queues around the block. But if you wanted a kind of a quick lunch, it just wasn't an option because you knew that the food was that good and it was so popular that you'd have to wait. And then as soon as they introduced their very expensive and very effective mobile app, all of a sudden they had click and collect, and you didn't have to queue up. You picked a convenient time slot, and that then became a big competitor to traditional grab and go operators like Panera Bread, for example. So it's interesting to see how sometimes if you're new and you're unencumbered by your kind of traditional ways of working or a particular mindset, you can actually find it much easier to respond to things like COVID-19 because you're sort of more flexible and adaptable.
It's quite interesting. Sweetgreen is a great example from the outset when they set up. I can remember I read an article from the founders where they said that they didn't see them primarily only as a restaurant hospitality business. They were also a driver of behavioral change. There was one thing in society, but also technology was from the outset one of the most important elements in the recipe for success. They knew, they understood, and they built a massive AI solution to understand where the produce comes from. But they knew that technology was very important to think about from the outset. And maybe they didn't have everything implemented from the outset, but there was an intent and a roadmap of some kind of way from the founders that knew that they needed that to succeed in the competition with other out there. If I totally agree with your analysis there. One of the interesting thing is that if you look before the pandemic as well, you saw the amount of money and the resources like big players like Chipotle and McDonald's. They are quick service grab and go concepts, I would say, implementing technology, and McDonald's even going out buying technology companies. So I guess there was some people that definitely had the resources and the vision that already were gearing up for this situation, even though they didn't know this was coming.
Sure. And I think probably the people in those organizations that, if you take McDonald's as an example, they spent, I think it was $100 million or something like that on their significant order ahead AI acquisition. And the person who drove that decision internally, I'm guessing, was probably seen as a bit of a maverick, really, and a bit of a trailblazer, because I bet that the majority of people at McDonald's kind of thought, look, we know what we're doing. We're we have a system and it works, but actually you really have to look a little bit further ahead and to kind of imagine, well, what are some worst case scenarios almost, or, what's the big kind of, the next big thing on the horizon that we need to worry about. So before COVID-19, a lot of restaurants, particularly groups, I think, were recognizing the potential for software and AI to improve their labor scheduling, which is for pretty much every hospitality business a huge cost, and one that you only need to control a little bit to actually have a significant saving across the business. So it's interesting that when people see the opportunity, actually they can really take on some quite significant projects. And McDonald's is obviously at a very extreme end of the spectrum in terms of the size and type of organizations, but even very small operators are starting to recognize, oh wow, there's technology out there that is all of a sudden much more accessible and much more affordable to small operators that could really help to give us a competitive advantage.
It's also about there's an element of the understanding when you choose technology, and we can come back to that, is that either in my world it has to make you more efficient, so save time, or it has to make you money in a way. And that's the two things you need to look at when you go out and try technology, I think.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I get asked a lot, operators or individuals sort of say, I feel overwhelmed by all of the potential things that we could do, the amount of technology that's on the market, the different projects that we could undertake. No one's short of ideas. We're certainly a very kind of creative industry. And the answer that I always give is, first of all, to focus on your inefficiencies. So work out how to save money, become more efficient, trim off the sort of the wastage, if you like, before you focus on the projects that will drive sales. And a lot of organizations, I think, find that sort of either counterintuitive, and they kind of think, growth must be achieved at all costs, or they sort of think, but is that, interesting enough or glamorous enough, and will that really help? And I think if you have an inefficient business for which you then grow sales, your waste is just becoming bigger. So you might sort of run a successful marketing campaign or introduce a fantastic new website that really kind of drives sales. But if in the back end you've got people manually rekeying information or working on processes that could be automated, or you've got an inefficient deployment of labor, a lot of that growth that you've worked so hard to achieve is then going to be wasted. So for me, it's about first identifying your inefficiencies. And the easiest way to do that is to look where you're using spreadsheets. So wherever you sort of say, where am I inefficient? I will just say, show me your spreadsheets. There is no reason to use a spreadsheet to run a hospitality business unless you are in a finance department. If you have anyone in an operational role using spreadsheets to plan their labor or to do their ordering or those sorts of things, there is almost always some sort of proper tech tool out there, or just a simplified process that means that you can get away from teams having to remember how to do complex formulae in Excel, and can get back to doing what they're in the hospitality industry to do, which is to run bars, restaurants, and cafes.
It's very interesting. Let's stay with the scheduling, because it's such a big thing for everyone, and where there's a lot of pain around as an operator. How many people to get on, and believe it or not, I agree with you. I still see a lot of spreadsheets, and I actually see people scheduling in spreadsheets and taking pictures of them and sharing them on WhatsApp. And there's a lot of other challenges about that. But just getting control or have an overview of your workforce, the amount of time you would save, and understanding of your business, because show me your scheduling and I can tell you how your business perform and how good it is. I'm no doubt about that, because that's the core thing. And the biggest inefficiency I've seen as an operator myself is often been around the scheduling, and the biggest conflicts as well around labor and the conversations around labor. And that's why don't get a tool that can help you with that? And I would say, if you haven't done that, and I know that there's people out there that hasn't done that, get that done now, because that's where you will take a lot of headache away, both, and also engage from just take an employee engagement point of view, that you actually can do everything through a phone or whatever it is. get away from those spreadsheets on that. I agree. Get away from spreadsheet, but scheduling is one of the things I've seen. And I don't know if you see the same thing. It's surprising that how many that still runs things from a spreadsheet point of view when it comes to scheduling.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that labor scheduling and planning and productivity area is one where lots of hospitality organizations are still doing that in a very old-fashioned way. If not a spreadsheet, then just a sort of printed out grid and scribbling names down, that kind of thing. It's one where the software is quite a mature market. There are lots and lots of options available. They tend to have very good integrations with things like your payroll system and other kind of downstream systems. They're pretty affordable, and the potential impact of them in terms of not just kind of shaving off a few kind of pennies of your weekly kind of labor percentage high level metric, but making sure that your shifts are really, really carefully planned so that you're optimizing your customer experience. You're not just making sure you don't have too many people on, but you've got the right number of people to satisfy your busiest period. So maybe you've got 1 hour in a day, which is your absolute peak. And maybe that's the time when you need to have your overlaps and making sure there's no kind of shift changes during that peak period. And for a lot of organizations, that sort of makes sense from a kind of strategic, theoretical perspective, but actually understanding exactly when are those periods and how do they change from one week to the next, and what difference does it make if the venue is urban or suburban or rural, and all of those different things. You could do that, and people have done that for a long time in their heads. But if you want something that's really going to make the most of the technology out there, and actually that doesn't rely on a manager having this almost sort of superhuman computing ability, just get a bit of software to do it. This is something that's very, very easy to specify and to adopt and to really see a very quick win from.
And it is super interesting what you said before as well about, a lot of people would like to start on the growth, the sales bit, but actually where the biggest gain is, now we talked about scheduling, is again, the inefficiencies behind the counter in a way, and how you operate in there. Because again, that's often where there is most spreadsheets. You don't show spreadsheets to customers. Most have a POS system that's already implemented and actually potentially doing an okay job. But actually, when you start working in the back of house, let's call it that, you will see amazing efficiency improvement if you implement that technology right, is my experience. And you also see engagement of your staff go up quite easily, because suddenly their job becomes easier because they have an overview of what they do. And I think often technology is also about giving you an overview and a bit of control of all these fluent things we have in the back of house.
Exactly. I mean, that's particularly the case for multiples, and the bigger an organization gets in terms of its number of sites, the harder it is to maintain consistency from one to the next, and the more important it gets to be able to report accurately. And that's, could be for everything from maintaining performance, making sure that standards are being adhered to, making sure that teams are legally compliant, and all of those sorts of things, as well as talking to investors or making sure that your business is profitable and sustainable. So lots of organizations kind of think, the back office stuff, it's a bit like when you go into a restaurant, right? When you see the front of house, if it's a good venue, there's a lot of thought has been put into what's the seating like, what's the lighting like, what's the ambience. And we spend a lot of time as operators in making sure those things are as good as they can be. Whereas the back office, no one expects that to be as glamorous as the front of house. But how often do we see the notice boards with all the old rotors stuck up, and the light bulb that's broken, and all those sorts of things? And I think that's very much the same for an organization's tech, that often they will focus a lot of attention on their POS system, often their website, those sorts of things. I've seen lots of organizations develop mobile apps for sometimes kind of real vanity reasons. We feel like we ought to have one, or we just would like to get into that space, whereas the back office is still kind of neglected. And actually, if we just spent a bit of time and a bit of resource on the back office, the efficiency gains that we can get mean that not only are we driving sales, but we're sure that the sales that we're creating are for customers who get a brilliant customer experience, and we know that we're not kind of wasting that growth through inefficiencies.
with that overview, and where we are from a maturity point of view, and then some very good examples of what you see out there in businesses, then we are now hit by something that really changed the world. Some businesses is totally closed down in hospitality. It's one of the industry that is hit the hardest. Everybody's hit, but there's definitely no doubt that hospitality is very hard hit by this situation. And then there's some that has kept open, and there has been a lot of digital talk and a lot of launch of digital, especially digital e-commerce channels and delivery and so on, has been quite hot topics in the moment. How do you see the whole pandemic and digitalization and what's gone on?
I think for hospitality, it's been probably more serious maybe than any other industry. I think the hospitality industry was already very fragile, and a lot of organizations were very unsustainable. And it was interesting to see how many failures there were within a day or so of sales being hit. So organizations basically saying after 1 or 2 days of not being able to trade, that's it. We are going bust, and we cannot sustain this any longer, which is kind of pretty depressing. I mean, I think it's, as I said before, this is an industry that people go into often because they love it. They love the hospitality, they love cooking, or they love entertaining and that kind of thing, and they enjoy having a restaurant full of people. But the margins have grown ever smaller, and the challenges in terms of kind of rent and rates, the labor costs are growing ever greater. And I think for a lot of operators, this has been, we've talked about a perfect storm before. This has really been the eye of the storm. And like a lot of industries, it's really sort of expedited a lot of the change and the churn that we've seen. So probably some of these businesses would have failed at some point, and this has really just been, the straw that broke the camel's back. What I've taken some comfort from is how quickly and how effectively a lot of organizations have pivoted, have adopted new technology. There are countless examples of those organizations who have switched from eat-in to takeaway or to delivery. There's a relatively mature market for delivery and aggregators, and that has been something I think that's supported a lot of hospitality organizations. But to their credit, they have adopted these new ways of working very, very quickly. And I bet if you'd said to them, before the pandemic, do you think you could pivot from having a full restaurant every day to operating entirely on delivery? They would have said, oh, that's going to take us, months to implement, and we'll never do it. And actually, a lot of them have found, okay, this isn't ideal, but we're making a go of it. It's keeping our business, keeping it going. And probably we're adopting some things that we can continue once the lockdown is lifted, or once we return to whatever normal looks like post COVID-19. So for a lot of businesses, I think this has really sort of galvanized them and helped them to cut out some of that inefficiency, to grow their business, or really to pivot to a different model, which is actually much more sustainable.
Yeah, it's super interesting what you say, Rob, about how quickly actually people, there has been this like surge in productivity about getting things done, or just try them out. For I have that startup mentality too, that we'll just have to do something now because the pressure is on, and I think it's a very good way of positioning, saying that what would you have done if you suddenly couldn't have people sitting in your restaurant and you only did takeaway? Have really forced people to be creative about how they serve the customer, and how they how they fulfill their needs of getting food in their homes, but also how they actually can order. What is the biggest like pivoted you've seen, and you've been quite surprised that went so fast after we hit lockdown?
There've been a few. I think Leon probably really stands out as an organization that sort of really grasped the nettle and kind of said, if we sort of forget everything that we thought we knew, what does our business need to look like? Partly they focused very carefully, I think, on what's the value that they could add. So they pivoted to a grocery model. They really looked at which sites they could keep open and what they could do best with them. They also did some fantastic PR work around supporting the NHS and frontline workers, and they really sort of galvanized industry around themselves in a way that I think a lot of organizations kind of, they did okay. They sort of said, we're doing our bit and we're, making hand sanitizer, or we're sending meals to hospitals or whatever. But Leon, I think, really kind of captured that very effectively. And now they've kind of launched this this platform, if you like, of video and podcast content, which is kind of, when we look back and say, well, what did we do during the lockdown? What did we do to keep productive? I think they've really looked at their marketing, and maybe this was a future plan that they've expedited. Maybe this is something they've just come up with on the hoof, but they've very quickly been able to put together and launch a very slick customer-facing brand growth website, if you like, that really kind of shows what they're about and will hopefully help them to engage with new customers. The other kind of smaller end of the spectrum, I guess, is the local one-off independent organizations, the coffee shops and the cafes who have changed their product offer. There's one near me who's kind of built this sort of fort out of their unused tables and chairs to maintain social distancing so that people can come and order things. They've, pivoted away from food cooked in the kitchen to things that they can handle with 1 or 2 people rather than 3 or 4. So they've got the social distancing for the staff. And I'm sure there are dozens or hundreds of those hospitality businesses who initially kind of felt like, well, that's it, we're over. That's the proclamation from the government. We have to shut up shop. To then thinking partly, we're bored of this. We can't just sit at home and, there's only so much gardening we can do before we start to get itchy feet. So I think we're now seeing some great kind of green shoots of hospitality businesses who are saying, it's not perfect. We're not back up to full speed. This still needs testing. But actually, when I talk to kind of operators local to where I live, they're saying, this is sustainable. It's not great. We'd rather have a cafe full of people. We'd rather be, running a full kitchen. But actually, compared with the alternative of either being on furlough or having to shut the business altogether, this is doable. Sometimes that's technology enabled. Sometimes that's, working with a partner like a delivery aggregator, for example. Sometimes it's just being really pragmatic and saying, well, what does our shop need to look like? How can we work and still be socially distant? So Pret has done a fantastic job of that. There's very little technology in terms of their business improvements, but what would make the most difference? Perspex screens, limited numbers of people entering the shop, increased hand washing. None of this is technology driven. There might be some tech out there that enables some of it, but actually this is just pragmatism, common sense, and being kind of realistic about what can we achieve.
It's super interesting, the 2 examples you give here, and I agree you've seen these 2 spectrum, especially Leon. We had Hugo on the podcast that was where I actually went live yesterday, talking about, they had some plans in place on digitalization. There was already a new version of Leon, especially from a digital point of view, and all these plans was just pushed forward, and they were executed faster than you normally would. And then they came up with some initiatives as well to tell the stories, what they were doing as well. So they've been very good at storytelling, as you said, through different mediums of using digital content like podcast and their websites and Feed Britain as a campaign and getting people involved. But also then you have where I think is very interesting what's happened on, normally the small operator that normally wouldn't think about technology, very quickly adapting. And I've seen a similar thing as you've seen in my local area. Actually, suddenly they have a web shop. You can order online. They will deliver it to your door. And that means you suddenly start to buy more locally just with the help of technology. And they're still getting their grips around it, but they're doing it because it's more bearable, as you said, than not having these orders coming in. So that's butchers. It's even there's a local coffee shop opening now. They're selling cakes because she makes her own cakes, so now she sells them online for click and collect. Together with coffee, you can go. I think she open 4 hours a day. So again, it just gives an example about how they've used technology to actually get back open. It actually gave them an opportunity to trade they didn't have if they only could do at the till.
Absolutely. And I think, obviously, COVID-19 has been an absolute calamity. No one would want to have seen this. But if we try and sort of travel ever hopefully. I think there have been two positives really for the hospitality industry and a lot of industries really. One is that this forced downtime has meant that we've really got no excuse to put off those projects that we've been sort of saying, oh, when I get round to it, it's not a kind of a burning platform. The things like implementing the back office software, the stuff that we've always said, oh, we really ought to do that, but now's not the right time. Well, you know what? Now's the right time because you've got nothing else to do but to look at this. And the other, I think, is that hospitality businesses particularly have often surprised themselves by how quickly they've been able to pivot. Looking at your coffee shop example, I would bet that that's something that proprietor wouldn't have thought of being able to do. If you'd sort of said, well, why don't you set up a web shop and sell your cakes, or to the high street butcher, why not just sell it online? They would have said, oh, it's too hard. I'm not a technology specialist. I can't afford the consultancy. Maybe it's too difficult. And now they're sort of going, well, actually, that was nowhere near as hard as we thought it was going to be. And, maybe they've created a useful kind of side hustle. Maybe the coffee shop owner will keep selling her cakes online when the lockdown is lifted. Maybe it's just shown them that actually these are tools that are available for everyone, and the barrier to entry for a lot of technology that used to be very, very complex is now much lower, and it's much more accessible to people of all kind of technology abilities.
What is interesting is that some people, they suddenly start selling to a new audience as well. They didn't know they had, because people share it on social media, and the operator's been clever and using social media had really maybe taking an uptake in sales they didn't have before. And that maybe for some I've been talking with means they're very close to where they originally will be, especially the one with a retail arm, cakes, butchers, wedge people. They are very close. Some of the wedge shop that's local for me, they have been over capacity for many reasons, because there was not enough weight. But again, they say the digital sales was before they had an email system. You could send them an email with your order, and then they will pack it, and they will come and drop it off on a Friday or Thursday. But now, since they deliver every day, I think their sales are up with 40% online compared to before. That's massive, and it's easier, as he said, than dealing with people in the shop, because they don't have to fill the shelf. They don't need to have it looking nice for these people. We just pack that box for them, and then we put it at their front door. That's it. And payment up front.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think a lot of members of the public have really taken to heart that kind of shop local, use it or lose it mentality. Everyone sort of recognizes that we want vibrant, dynamic, diverse high streets, and hospitality is obviously a significant part of what makes a high street appealing. And I think a lot of people have realized they can't keep relying on one massive supermarket for all their needs if they want to see the small independent local shops near them thriving. I think I'm obviously sort of a little biased because they're a current client, and I'm a sort of a bit of a Gales super fan. But what they did in pivoting from a mixed retail hospitality model to a pure retail model, this was a significant shift in their business. But actually, having a foot in the door of retail, or quite a significant one, meant that it was relatively easy for them to shift and to continue to provide that service. What I think has really set some businesses apart from others is their sort of savvy when it comes to social media. So if you want to make your product known beyond the people that typically walk past you, if you're a cafe business that's reliant on footfall, maybe you need to reach a different demographic, and actually using social media as a way to promote your business, particularly if your business has changed somewhat, if you've got a new offer that people might not know about. Social media now, I think, is more important than ever. And lots of hospitality businesses, particularly the small independents, I think kind of either shied away from social media or kind of saw it as a bit of a kind of, oh, I probably ought to. And, it's not something I find interesting, but everyone else is doing it. Maybe I should kind of be involved. Now it's being seen as a really important sales driver and way for people to understand what they're up to. I saw on the Propel this morning that loungers who operate, I think, a few hundred lounges and cozy club venues around the UK, they were able to survey 6,000 of their sort of loyal customers and find out what their views were on, would they come back? Do they want to see social distancing? How does the offer need to change? So being able to access those customers either through social channels or because you've built up relationships with them digitally somehow, I think is what's going to really set some organizations apart when we come to returning back to, lifting lockdown and seeing hospitality businesses open their doors again. So being kind of ahead of that curve, if you like, and really understanding what is digital communication, what role does social media play in my business, I think is going to be increasingly important.
Super interesting you touch on that, because I think there's a lot of people that has been on social media but haven't really thought deeper about how they put products on and stuff like that, but they forgot the whole essence of what I think it's about. It's about storytelling. It's about talking about the life in your business, and of course, thereby the product indirectly. But actually, the people have been already doing that. I've seen some local one here in Brighton where I was, and they just, like, from a takeaway point of view, there's soared expectations because people really missed them, but they could still communicate them with telling stories, making small videos, and talking to them how they feel about things, and be very honest and raw. And actually, that's what helps. But on the other side, when you talk about knowing your customers, like you mentioned lounges, I saw that article. Well, again, this shows that there has been a strategy of having a CRM system put in place, so you actually know who your customers are and what their needs and wants are and how they want it served. And it's very interesting they've done that work before they open, because maybe they're not going to have the full picture, but they're definitely going to have a better picture by having some data. And technology is also about data. We haven't even touched that. Data to make better business decision, more structured data, more clean data than your gut feeling that normally are used in hospitality. What are you thinking about, like, the organization that prepped for that and had some data to make decisions as they walk through this? Do you think they're going to come out better on the other side, or?
Yeah, I mean, that's my sort of general take on it, is that the organizations that had invested in either in just in their social channels, who had a presence on Instagram or Facebook or Twitter or wherever their customers are, will have found the transition into lockdown and then the shift back out again. I think they will find that somewhat easier. My caveat, though, is that the more important thing is your customer offer. And I think if you have a kind of a mediocre hospitality business, but a fantastic social media offer, that, no one's paying to talk to you on Instagram. And so you'll have to really make sure that your product offer is exactly what your customers want it to be in order to succeed with reduced footfall and greater uncertainty and the sort of the anxiety that customers are likely to have about resuming their hospitality habits. But undoubtedly, having that capability, that sort of digital capability established before going into lockdown, I think is going to be much easier to maintain than for an organization who didn't do that before and are now sort of playing catch up and trying to grow that customer sort of relationship or even database digitally.
Takes me a bit to, again, we're now seeing slowly reopening. I think there's communication coming out each day around in the news about these and these are ready to open. This is the date they're gonna do it, and there's this reopening going on. And there's no doubt about feeling safe as a consumer is extremely important right now. We are in the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We want to feel safe, and that's the feeling you have to help to create around your products, the way you operate, the way the physical environment is, payment and everything. What would your thinking be that, what would be the best way to now to reopen your physical unit, and how can technology actually be a big part of facilitating this, that people feel safe, both employees and customers for that sake?
I think a lot of that feeling of safety is around communication and your perception and your understanding of what the business is doing. So I think a lot of that kind of happens outside of the venue. So as you're preparing to reopen, I think we've seen some really interesting examples. Pret is one, Gales is another, but lots and lots of organizations are doing this. They're explaining in simple terms, these are the steps that we're taking to keep our staff safe. These are the measures that we're putting in place to keep our customers safe. And sometimes that's about managing expectations, and it's about saying, you'll have to queue for longer. We're only having 2 customers in the shop at any one time. If you want a better service, then order online and we'll have it ready for you to collect. So a lot of that conversation is happening before people even get to the venue. I think there is an opportunity to really double down on cleanliness and kind of making sure that some of those cleaning processes, if you like, that used to be a bit more kind of, we do those only in quiet times, or we try and avoid the customer kind of seeing that. People are going to want to see that, and they're going to want to see those measures. One way that technology could help that is with a compliance app like Trail, which a lot of operators, large and small, have implemented, that is not just sort of taking out some of the guesswork, but it's helping to demonstrate to customers, not only are we doing this, but we can prove that we're doing it. We can see the sort of steps that we're taking. So I think those sorts of technology solutions are being slightly more kind of foregrounded now, if you like, because people are saying, actually, we really need to keep on top of this. It won't be enough to say we've got the health and safety policy that people have read and signed on the day that they joined. We need to be really active about the stuff like, cleanliness, inspections, temperature checks, all of those sorts of things people will have a heightened awareness of. So using some sort of paperless, app-driven, easily verifiable, auditable record-keeping system, I think is going to be more important than ever.
I guess, that thing is totally spot on. I think what you said is about how you feel before you actually approach the space. So it's actually the pre-communication and, telling people how you will take payment, take them on the, your journey, your customer journey, how you have reimagined that. And that brings me into the next thing I would like to discuss with you, because I guess that, the progressive operator is right now reviewing both their customer and their employee journey and thinking about what is it that we need to do short-term and long-term from a digital point of view to first of all, right now and here, make it feel safe with implementing technology, but also how do we actually optimize? Because we know the market we're coming on the other side is not going to be anything as we left, and it's going to take a very long catch-up time to get to the same numbers with these restrictions. As long as we don't have a cure, as we all say, we in principle have social distance in place and limitation on hospitality operation. So what are your thinking that you need to start thinking about now as an operator? Let's just say the next 90 days, Rob, to make it realistic and within the world we can manage.
I think the next 90 days still present an opportunity to get your house in order. So again, it's a question of looking at where is your business inefficient, where you might have been able to carry some of that inefficiency or just rely on continued or high sales to sort of offset that. You just won't be able to sustain it. So this really, it still, I think, is going to be a what hopefully we'll see in hindsight as being a golden opportunity to really review those processes, to understand where we're inefficient, to get rid of those spreadsheet-driven activities, and to make sure that our business is as joined up as it can be. I think there's a particular issue around managing communications with staff, though. So I think if there were an area to focus on, if you haven't already, it would be on employee engagement and internal communications. What I mean by that is making sure that all the information that you have on your staff teams is up to date and you have your kind of records in place, but particularly that you're almost over communicating with them where they might be on furlough, or maybe their shifts are reduced, or where you're uncertain about the future of the business or what it might look like. Just maintaining that dialogue with them, I think, is going to be so much more important than it ever has been. And there are lots and lots of ways of doing that I think we just haven't had before. So if I imagine even kind of 5 years ago, 10 years ago, what would the hospitality industry have done with a COVID-19 pandemic? We would have been, I think, in a much, much weaker position in terms of keeping in touch with our teams. Lots of organizations have been using things like Facebook and WhatsApp for a long time, and they're getting a lot of benefit from that. But I think partly those consumer platforms are very hard to control the narrative, and partly people have to keep in mind that using them for work purposes is not GDPR compliant. So if there was an area to focus on, I think for the next 90 days, it would be around internal comms, making sure that you have the right systems in place in terms of the technology solution, but also making sure that your processes are there to show that people are able to engage, you're able to give updates to your teams in a very consistent way. You can sort of have that near real-time communication with them. The tools that are out there are very, very accessible and very easy to use, and they follow a very similar kind of social network type format with things like a newsfeed and instant messaging that people find very easy to adopt. So for me, this is a really potentially easy and quick win that will help you with the next 90 days, but that will also stand your business in good stead for growth, particularly for sort of multiples and the larger operators. For everyone, employee engagement is important. And I think even the smallest hospitality operators, if you're reliant on staff that are kind of outside your immediate family, then this is an area that you need to focus on and keep on top of.
We really agree with you there, because also if you don't have this implemented, how are you with all the initiatives you want to do, digital initiative, a change you need to do? How are you going to ensure you have the right organizational drumbeat, I call it? How are you going to ensure that you actually can have people with you as you need to become more productive? You need to change the way of working. You need to change technology, change processes. If you can't quickly communicate and get feedback from the front line. And again, there's lots of research, and we wrote an article here at Hospitality Maverick once around, lots of these change projects, especially around digitization, actually doesn't happen because of the lack of communication or bad communication from top to bottom or sideways or across, because there is no infrastructure put in place or no rules for how you communicate and how you actually get things out to the front line and actually understand if it works for them as well, because that's so key with technology, that actually works in the hands of the people and not only theoretical when you design the project. And I think this is a brilliant opportunity to remove that red tape, because people understand and know they need to adapt now, and there will be new ways of doing things. So this is a brilliant opportunity to get that communication infrastructure in place, as you say, and start making the right plan that refocus the digital efforts you need to change, your business as you go forward.
Absolutely. I mean, I think one doesn't want to sound too positive or optimistic about what has been an incredibly difficult time for the whole planet, and particularly the hospitality industry is so sort of disproportionately affected by it. But if you're of that sort of can-do attitude that probably a lot of people get into hospitality as a result of, this could be a golden opportunity to implement change. And I think lots of us, in our personal lives, that we're sort of sensing that, are we making the most of this downtime? Are we learning that language or reading all the books that we thought we would, or are we just sort of watching Netflix and catching up with our soaps? And it's much the same for businesses of all types. It's very rare that you have a period of enforced downtime and introspection and the ability to sort of think strategically and to look at a business in the sort of slightly abstract. So hopefully this will be a time when people are able to implement those changes or to undertake those projects that they've been putting off for a long time. And they will say, I wouldn't have wanted it, but actually I've used the time as well as I could.
It's a very unfair question in principle, but I ask everyone on this special edition, how do you envision the landscape the next 12 to 18 months? And you can take the digital angle if you want to, but what do you think there's going to be the big milestones happening within the next 12 months? How is hospitality looking if from the knowledge you have today? Of course, it changes every day and every week.
Yeah, it's very tough to sort of have that crystal ball view. I think a lot of people are really kind of prepared to weigh in with their predictions. I think the one that I see very often, and the one that I'm sort of a bit conflicted about myself, is the so-called death of the office. So are we, as a nation or as a people, are we sort of starting to recognize that actually a lot of the things that I go to an office for, I have at home. Do I really need to spend an hour or more each way traveling on a packed tube train? For a lot of organizations, Twitter and Facebook and others, they've kind of said actually remote working is going to continue indefinitely. Lots of organizations are saying our offices won't reopen this side of Christmas. It's just easier to plan that way. So where does that leave city centre hospitality operators who are built around big communities of office workers? Maybe their model is very much at risk, but will we start to see a commensurate growth in the suburban high street, in towns away from big cities where people sort of choose to live for that slightly more comfortable quality of life, or more space? Maybe we start to see a bit of a shift in balance. For the large multiples, if they've invested heavily in city centre sites, and that's the sort of the Pret's, Coco de Mamas, Leon's, maybe that's a significant risk. And we're already seeing organisations changing the way that they sort of think about paying their rent, and some really fundamental shifts. From a digital perspective, that's going to mean maybe an impact on food for delivery. Maybe people are more comfortable with delivery at home than they are in the workplace, but understanding how to serve that market, and particularly where people are more distributed or they're not prepared to kind of come to the venue that's nearest to their office, looking at that kind of cost to serve and the delivery model, and how do you get people to sort of come to the venue. I think partly that will have a sort of a technology focus to it, making sure that we're sort of as lean as we possibly can be in serving customers with delivery. But a lot of it, I think, is fundamental change that actually technology will have a very secondary role, and it will really be about looking at where businesses are situated and what their model is. And to an extent, those are issues that technology can't fix.
I really like your view on the office bit, because I've been in principle looking at the same and thought, yeah, of course there's a degree of that, but there's also a reality. There's not everybody that can work from home, and it's not really doesn't work for them. So I think, yeah, it's going to be an interesting transition, because all that really has an impact on high street, especially around London or anywhere where there's offices. That could have a massive impact, the whole lunch trade. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see also how that involved. To wrap it up, Rob, what would be your 3 top advice? You're already given a couple of advice during the conversation, but what are your top 3 advice to operators out there? And let's take the digital angle. What is it that they should do right now and the next coming time here? Because of course, in 3 months' time, your advice would probably be different. But right now, what would you say they should do?
Okay, so I think in general terms, hospitality operators need to remember that their customers choose the operator, not the technology that they have. And that's especially true at the moment, but is a general good principle to follow. That first, focus on your customer offer and make sure that's as good as it can be. If you're thinking about ways to improve your business, I would focus on understanding the problem that you're trying to solve. So try and forget, if you can, all of the kind of good advice that you've had, or the adverts on LinkedIn or social media, or the things that have popped up in your inbox saying we can revolutionize your business. First, understand what it is that your big problems are that you're trying to fix before you go out to the market. And then finally, I think take a systems approach. So understand the entirety of your hospitality business, whether that's a single shop or a big multiple in different countries. Look at the flow of the customer and look at how employees do their roles. So try and understand the whole system and work out where the pinch points are, or where the sort of the greatest inefficiencies are. In terms of the very specific kind of COVID-19 things that hospitality operators need to look at, we've sort of talked about these in a bit more detail throughout the call. But to summarize, employee engagement, really important, making sure that you're able to have really effective, very quick, very well-received internal comms is crucial. Labor productivity and sort of forecasting and making sure that you've got the right staff on at the right time, I think is going to be really important. And then that social media, digital engagement piece, which might be kind of making sure that your email campaigns are really good. It might be making sure that your customer records, if that's relevant to your business, are all up to date. It might just be doing more and doing better social media, but understanding and improving on that digital customer relationship is crucial. It would have been great if you'd been great at it before the pandemic started, but it's never too late to start.
That's super interesting, because when I was sitting here making notes, it's like you're saying, gather facts, analyze, just don't start doing something, but analyze where the 20% give 80%, and then you say make a plan, and then execute very fast on it, and measure again if you've been successful at that. Is that correctly?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's not just for hospitality. I mean, it's useful advice for people in all different types of industry, but trying not to have one massive killer project where you plan and plan and plan, and you have this sort of very fixed, immovable milestone that will inevitably lead to disappointment. It's a really difficult way to work, and it's probably not going to help very much. So with implementing technology particularly, I would always urge people to iterate, to find ways of building in customer feedback or staff feedback, seeing how you can kind of gradually implement change, make sure that the thing that you thought you needed to do is the right thing to do. So make sure that you've got room to pivot or to kind of adjust and really kind of take into account the feedback that you get. It's particularly useful for hospitality operators, especially when they're trying new things. So I think if you're looking at how you emerge from lockdown faced with people wanting delivery or people wanting collection, or faced with not being able to fully open your kitchen or limited numbers of people, and that point where we sort of have that awkward screens up in the dining room and people sort of socially distant from each other, trying new things and seeing what works will help if you give yourself permission to fail. And if you're able to try things and run a trial in one venue before you roll it out to other places, or understanding how you might need to shift your business model, will help you to respond to those new challenges.
Amazing, Rob. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast and sharing your insights and knowledge with out there. And I'm sure there's some people out there that's going to grab some of this and start making some changes in the organization and actually look a bit different on the whole digital approach in the organization.
Thank you. If I can just do a quick shameless plug, I talked a bit about that sort of systems-wide thinking and really understanding your whole business. I created this resource, Hospitality Tech Stack, which is at hospitalitytech.uk. And on there's a template that you can use to really kind of understand all of the different technology systems that you have in place in your restaurant or across your business, and looking at the things where, actually, this process is an Excel-based process, or this is something we do on paper. You can see the sorts of things you ought to look out for, ways to evaluate different kind of software solutions, and some recommended suppliers. So hopefully that will be of use to some people if they are taking the time to take that systems-wide approach and understand where they need to focus their attention.
We will put that in the show notes as well, because that was what I also referred to in the introduction, that you have actually built some very good content that can help you get that overview. So it's very good you remember that, Rob. So that's probably one place to go to start the journey, to get a bit of an overview. I will totally agree on that. Thank you again, Rob, and you stay safe, and power and energy for you to get through this as well.
Thanks, Michael.
Wow, Rob. Amazing conversation around digitalization and how to use tech to leverage performance in the new now. If you enjoyed today's podcast, please give us a like, share it, rate it, and let us know what you think. If you have not checked out our previous episodes, you can find them all on the Hospitality Mavericks podcast channels. Coming Back Stronger series is brought to you by the wonderful people at Vitamojo, the digital partners for ambitious operators like Leon, Yo Sushi, Farmer J, and other leading brands transforming their businesses with technology. Check them out at software.vitamojo.com and contact them directly by nick.liedl@vitamojo.com. Thank you for listening.